Welcome back to Switch to Linux, and welcome back to another year. It is now 2019. I thought the world would end by now, but it hasn't, and so we must go on. And the best way to begin a new year is to look back to the old. And so we are going to look at the distros that I reviewed in 2018. These are all the ones to qualify. These are the ones that I tested, not main production systems. These are going to be all run on bare metal, not in virtual machines. And I'm going to basically talk about the distro, how it started the year, how it ended the year, and give you some links. So take a look at the links in the description down below. I'll go ahead and card a few of these in, but since we can only do 5, I have to pick, and I'll probably pick whatever I consider the best distros of the year. But all of the links to the websites I'm going to show and to my bare metal reviews will be in the description down below, and I'll go ahead and timestamp those as well. So I got my pen ready so I can remember to do my timestamps, and hopefully this is going to work out very well. Okay, so the first distro was Elementary OS. This is the one I began 2018 running. Of course, if you follow my channel, I say that there's certainly some use applications for it. This isn't the worst distro in the world, but to me, it's one of the most polarizing. On the pro side, it is a Linux distribution in which a person who wants to get an operating system but not touch any of it, who wants to use their system to simply check some emails and get on a web browser, Elementary OS might be okay. This is also a good distro for if you have a family computer and you want to have parental accounts on things, because it has some of the best built-in parental tools in the Linux world. The downsides, it is completely uncustomizable. They completely break it from every version to the next version. So every bit of documentation you find from a previous version will likely not work. And then it does suffer from a lot of stability things. A lot of the people that really say it's a great distro, they're your hardcore Linux users. They're going to boot up the distro, go into a terminal, do all their geeky Linuxy stuff in the terminal, and then they go, wow, this is a great system. But they forget that the user experience is horrid. It looks not only that, but the appearance. The appearance of this distro is that of a knockoff Mac. And some of their documentation is like, no, we're not trying to duplicate Mac. Other people say, yeah, they do seem to be duplicating Mac. If you look at this and you're familiar with the Mac OS UI, you know they're trying to duplicate Mac, no matter what they say. And it looks bad. It is horrible. It's not sleek. It's not elegant. It's not beautiful. To me, it is an ugly piling steam of whatever. But that is a very subjective thing. Some people absolutely love the beauty of Elementary OS. I completely disagree. I identified several issues with it. It suffers from stability. It might be that the latest version has fixed some of that. I think actually some of it has. It suffers from the fact that for a Linux distribution, you pretty much can't do anything. They've disabled PPAs, which is native to Ubuntu, which this is based on. They have disabled a deb package manager. So if you need to get Skype, if it's not in the repo, you ain't installing it without going into the terminal and doing some code. And most people who try to do that renders the system inoperable. In addition to that, you can't work off the desktop. Of course, my review showed you how to do that. I do like working off the desktop, so I actually added that functionality. It's still possible, I think. So the Elementary, like I said, this is a very polarizing distro. You either really love Elementary or you really hate Elementary, and there's not a whole lot of in between. I sit on the side of not liking it, but I recognize there's good use case scenarios for it. Of course, I did my final video of it, in which case you can see here I actually am running the desktop icons. I was able to get everything working. You know, I got it working to a point. It just was not a very good experience. But anyway, that was my take on Elementary OS. So the next OS I went and looked into is Ubuntu Budgie. Now here I jumped kind of between Ubuntu Budgie and Linux Mint Ubuntu. And so we'll do Ubuntu Budgie next, and then we'll jump into the next one. So, of course, this is based on Ubuntu, and about the time I released this video, this was in March, so this was actually the beta for 1804. Now, this caused a little bit of issue because when the Ubuntu 1804 LTS first came out, it had a lot of problems and bugs that, frankly, most of them are fixed at this point, but it's still, for me, a questionable package base. I don't go there unless I feel like I have to. There's some instances I have. It seems to be working a lot better now. So I did this video as a beta. Of course, the Ubuntu Budgie is the community build, which utilizes the Budgie desktop instead of the now default GNOME desktop. And this is definitely, in my opinion, the best Ubuntu flavor right now. So if you are looking to run it, I would probably steer towards this. Other people might say, and maybe a good contested alternative would be Ubuntu Mate. I think that even the basic core Ubuntu is starting to fall out of favor. It's just because GNOME is not as user-friendly. It's more resource-heavy. It just doesn't have as good of a feel. At least with Unity, it tended to operate better. It had its own feel. Now it just doesn't feel like it. And so some of your other community builds, such as Mate or in this case Ubuntu Budgie, seem to have really taken over. So I ran this, and my overall take of this is if you wanted to run an Ubuntu-based distro, this is definitely the one that I would run. It is very stable. I didn't have any issues with it. A couple little things I talked about that were a few little annoyances, but really nothing that bad. I did enjoy the setup. This was a distro. I think I ran it for quite a while because it was very good. So if you're looking for a good Ubuntu-based one, this might very well be a distro for you to try out. Next, of course, my favorite is Linux Mint. That's what I'm recording this video on, and it is my undisputed best distro. But what I wanted to experiment with is I really like the Ubuntu desktop. Of course, Linux Mint got rid of the KDE, which made some people a little bit sour, so now there's only 3 flavors officially, and that is your Cinnamon, which is their flagship. They have the Mate, and they have the XFCE. All 3 of those are great builds. However, what if you want to run other things? Can you run KDE? Absolutely. I showed you this year how to put KDE on this. But the other thing that I did is I actually ran a Linux Mint Budgie. I installed the Budgie desktop on top of this. I gave us a very nice Cairo dock. And this was an amazing distro. It gave me the rock solidness of Linux Mint on top of a very beautiful Budgie desktop environment. And this is a distro that was just absolutely amazing. If you're looking for something fun and unusual to do, go ahead, do this. I have a video about how to actually build the Linux Mint Budgie desktop. And this is just a great distribution overall. The thing about Budgie, and I ran Budgie on 3 different desktops this year. 3 different distros this year. Budgie is the desktop. 3 different distros this year. I did the Ubuntu Budgie, I did Budgie on Linux Mint, and I also did Solus, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This one here, what I like about this desktop, it's based on the GNOME 3, so it has a lot of those modern UI elements to it. It has a modern UI appearance, but it gives us a lot more customizability inside of the desktop than GNOME does, which is practically uncustomizable without third-party extensions, and I'm not a huge fan of that. And so with this, what we were able to do was combine the modern desktop experience with a higher level of customizability to get exactly what I wanted. In addition to this, this has what's called the Raven menu, which is this nice slide pop-out menu. I don't know if I have a picture of it somewhere here or not, but the Raven menu will allow you to, there we are. So there's our Raven menu, which is kind of like the Mac where it kind of slides out from the side. We have apps and applets, so you can control your music, you can control your audio outputs, your calendar, but you also have your notification panel over here as well. That's what's really great about the Budgie desktop. Of course, this would apply to the Linux Mint, the the Ubuntu or the Solus, which I will talk about shortly, but not yet, because the next one we need to talk about is actually going to be Fedora. So I ran Fedora twice this year. One time it was a horrible, wretched experience, and the second time I'm still running it, which is a great experience. And some of this maybe is growing and maturing as a Linux user. Some of it is the fact that the first time I was using GNOME, the second time I was using KDE, which I prefer KDE or Plasma over the GNOME desktop. But Solus ran into a lot of issues. Now, part of this is, if I remember correctly, I think this was actually running Fedora 28, which caused some issues. This is still Fedora, still was very difficult to get setting up. The classic thing about Fedora is it just doesn't like to play nicely with your closed source codecs, any multimedia codecs, other things. There's classically been these massive lists of things you do. You have to install Fedora and then spend a day getting it set up. Well, if I'm going to install an operating system and spend a day getting it set up, I may as well run Windows. I'm going to get a more stable system at the end, because Fedora is going to update itself on a regular rolling release every 9 months, wipe entire itself out, and then you're going to have to go back through and do it all again. Now, one of the most radical changes they have done is when Fedora 29 came out, a lot of that changed. We're now in the basic GNOME version, and even this video here, I'm actually pointing a camera at it because I couldn't get screen recording to work. That has all been resolved. With Fedora 29, they made it a whole lot easier to get a lot of those settings, and so that giant list of things became very small. There's now a setting to install the multimedia codec, so you don't have to fight with any of that. There's easy settings to turn on the non-free repos, so you don't have to mess with that, and that is all a great user experience. So while my video here about Fedora was a bad review video, this was the older version. The latest version of Fedora has really turned itself around and become something really great. And so definitely have a look at Fedora on version 29 or later. But the version 28, which this video is based on, not quite so good. Pretty bad experience. Now, presently, I'm running the Plasma version of Fedora 29. We go back to some of the older issues where it's not as easy to get those codecs installed, but I was able to get everything turned on. And since I got all of those turned on, all the multimedia codecs, this has been a great system. I have the review of it done, the full review. I just did it a couple of days ago from the time I'm recording this. But you know what? I don't have a real big need to jump off of it yet. So it's conceivable I'll stay on this for another couple weeks. It just depends. Maybe you guys can tell me which distro to jump to next. And if I get a solid direction one way or another, maybe we'll go that direction. I don't know. But regardless, well, the year for me started out with Fedora being like, it turned into an amazing experience. So I can say at the end, still not good for the new Linux user, but if you are a computer guy or you want to learn more about Linux, Fedora is a great place to go. It's going to teach you a lot about running Linux, and the strides and the changes that they have made in the last, couple of months here has just been great strides. Speaking of other distros that have not started well but ended great, Solus. This was originally going to be on my recommended distros for 2018, and I kicked it off at the last minute in favor of Ubuntu Budgie. The reason is I installed this thing several times and it just kept breaking. It turned out that the older version of Solus, once you installed it, it was fine. And then when you ran the first batch of updates, it bricked the system. You had to fight with it a little bit to get it up and running. Now, they have since fixed that. So now if you install Solus, it will not brick itself on the system updates. And then what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a very beautiful, very great distro. Downsides, it does not have a lot of things in the repos. It really doesn't. And so it relies on snap packages to get you the software that you want, which to me is kind of a downside. I am not an advocate of the snap packages. But we do get a very beautiful, very lightweight, new modern distro. And by the way, I talked about Budgie. These are the guys that developed it. So you're going to have the latest and the best Budgie experience running it on Solus. I found this to be a great distro. There were some pros, there were some cons to it, but at the same token, running this distribution, once you get this guy up and running, it's pretty solid. It gets some regular updates. It didn't break itself after that main issue. The icon packs are fairly fresh, not my personal favorites, but at the same time, icon packs that I could live with, and that good modern Budgie UI. And so Solus made a lot of strides this year, in which case they've done a lot of good adjustments, a lot of good changes. So for whatever reason, I can't jump ahead in the video here. I'm kind of stuck, so I can't go through and just jump around to different thumbnails, whatever else. But definitely, if you're looking for a good Solus or a good Budgie implementation, Solus all the way. It's a great distro. Definitely one to be looking at. Now, of course, we had a Deepin showdown. We have the Deepin distro, and then of course the Deepin desktop environment. So these are two. The desktop environment's called Deepin, but there's also the Deepin OS, which are the developers of the Deepin desktop environment. This is one what kind of had some rockiness throughout the year, and my current implementation is burn it with fire. Okay. So it kind of started out like, there's a little bit of, some people really like it, some people don't, some people really question it. It is a Chinese product, and I even had a Chinese developer who said, it's a Chinese product, avoid it. I even had somebody say that in my comments. It's a Chinese product, I would absolutely avoid it. And so they had some people were suspicious of them. A lot of tech guys did some research on it. They're kind of saying, this seems to be okay. But midway through this year, QuidSub identified that they had put a tracking script in the Deepin store. So the store that comes with the Deepin OS was basically sending analytics data back to China. Kind of the same thing. It was like dropping Google Analytics in the store. So it could see whatever you added, whatever you removed through the software store. You could still install things through the terminal or through Synaptic or other things that wouldn't see that. But the store on the Deepin OS is one of the best elements about it. So it had that controversy. And then the next version, they took that out. So the controversy went around. And so I tried running this for a few weeks, and I found it to be a very good user experience. Really, the only big negative about the desktop environment and the distros, it had this annoying issue with the notifications I talked about. Some people tried to propose different solutions, which were not real solutions, and I've defended against why those were not real solutions several times. All right, but regardless, they were solutions that were in there. And then the thing about, though, is this is one of the most complete. If there was a desktop environment that could go the farthest strides to becoming this commercialized desktop environment, it would be the Deepin environment. It's beautiful. It can be set up like a Windows or like a Mac without any major configuration. One of the downsides is the settings panel is a little bit complicated the way they're putting it in the sidebar. Now, why with all of that glowingness do we say burn it with fire? Well, it has to do with the fact that when the latest version that came out, they're forcing you to agree to a arbitration clause, or a EULA rather, that has some very crazy, very nebulous things that are not particularly good. And so, burn it with fire. And so what I end up doing is saying, and a lot of people ask, how does this compare to running Manjaro, which has a community build? And so I ran Manjaro Deepin next. Now, Manjaro is a Arch-based distro, which if you're wanting to experiment with Arch and start learning Arch, I'd probably go to Manjaro first because it's very good. It has a little bit of controversial thing. Matthew Moore this year had a video where he was having a lot of issues with Manjaro. Some people tried to help. The Manjaro devs tried to help, but ultimately, it got down to the bottom line where he just said it's just not worth it. Some people have said Manjaro works great until you update the system and it breaks it. I personally have run Manjaro twice. I ran it 2017 and 2018. It never gave me any problems personally, but I understand that it does give some people some issues. For me, the biggest issue with them is they redesigned their website this year and they turned what was a great website into an atrocious piece of crap. This website is horrid. It's not a very good distro, not a very good website. The distro is great. The website's just horrid. But I ran this with the Deepin desktop environment, and then I did, whoa, wrong button. That's not what I wanted to do. And then I ran a video about comparing the desktop environments on Deepin versus Manjaro. Ultimately, I came down and said Deepin OS is the best implementation of it, just because of a few little tiny subtle things. It was such a close match. Right now, my recommendation is if you want to run the Deepin desktop environment, either install it manually on top of something else or use Deepin's the Deepin on Manjaro. I would not use the Deepin OS right now because of the EULA that they are trying to push down. So that is, I ran the Manjaro and the Deepin OS both on the Deepin desktop environment. You can see those and have a look at the video that I did comparing the two desktop environments because it was a great video. Now, the next thing I did, of course, the last distro I ran throughout the year was the Fedora KDE we've already talked about. So the last one we're going to be covering here on this guy is going to be our Linux Mint Debian edition. So, of course, this is the Linux Mint version, which instead of being based on Ubuntu is based on Debian stable, which in this case right now is Debian Stretch. So on this one, you're going to get a few older packages, but you're going to get some of the latest implementations of the Linux Mint software. So I actually found this to be a very stable system. I was able to successfully update the kernel. I was able to add other desktop environments such as GNOME and KDE on top of it. So I was actually able to do a lot of things with this. So my final assessment of Linux Mint Debian Edition is it was a great distribution. Of course, the default package or the default desktop is Cinnamon. And you can get, though, a variety of different desktops built on it because this is based on Debian. Anything that's going to work on Debian is going to work on this. It is a little bit easier to set up than Debian, being that it has the non-free repositories already enabled. So it should work better out of the box with more non-free video cards and other services like that. So for that reason, it's pretty good. I still did have to push the flat volume audio fixes to get Kodi, among some other things, to work. But I had a lot of good experience with this desktop. Overall, it was a great experience, and it was a great thing to know that if Ubuntu goes totally crazy, Linux Mint Debian Edition is a great fallback position. So those are the bare metal reviews that I did this year. And stay tuned in the next, probably the next month or two. I'll put out my top distros for 2019 as we look ahead to what is coming. So what was your favorite distro that you ran this year? And do you have any other comments or any other suggestions as to what I should run after I'm done with Fedora KDE over here? So thanks for coming along, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux. Thank you for making it to the end of this Switch to Linux video. You can have a look at another video right on over here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel or to Think Life Media, which is my own personal support page. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.